Okay, Steve, the Word of God is alive and powerful.
And it's sharper than any two-edged sword, piercing, dividing asunder of the soul and the spirit and the joints and the marrow, and is a critic of the thoughts and intents of the heart.
All Scripture is God-breathed.
And is profitable for doctrine, for reproof, for correction, for instruction in righteousness, that the man of God may be mature, thoroughly furnished unto all good works.
Study to show yourself approved unto God.
A workman that needeth not to be ashamed,
Rightly dividing the word of truth. We always say that the spiritual spin stops right here because we really care for you. So go ahead and pray for us, Steve. Give us about 15 seconds or so to confess any known sin we might have, and we're going to move on.
Father, it's a great privilege always to pause in the middle of the week and study your word, so we'll be sharper and more equipped to face the devil's schemes in this world today. So we ask your blessing on what is taught here today. Even though we're deviating from the Acts and the Apostle Paul study, this is so very important for us to understand this as citizens, as Christian citizens in this country. So give Dr. Jim the ability to plainly explain it to us and help us to receive it well and to know it and to share it. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Okay, Steve, let me reach over here because we got somebody wanting to let me in on a just a second. Let me in on a meeting out here somewhere.
You are a true gourmand.
Okay, let me do this. Hang on just a second, folks. Going to have to get this back to Facebook. Okay, there we go again. Now we'll hope that that it was a political meeting, and they want me to join that meeting.
It's bad timing.
Yeah, bad time. So, Steve, tonight our subject is incontrovertible evidence of the unconstitutionality of the 14th Amendment. Now, by incontrovertible evidence, that means once you see the evidence, there's absolutely no way that you could say that what we're going to say tonight is true. The evidence is so.
I would say that it's untrue.
What's that?
Say what we're going to say tonight is untrue.
No,
evidence.
No, we're gonna say what is true. This thing is going to prove that what has been said about the 14th Amendment, they're telling us that it is valid. And we're saying that this information tonight is going to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that the 14th Amendment is unconstitutional. Now, someone might say, well, who cares about that? You know, the 14th Amendment, I don't know what it does. Well, you might need to care. You really need to care, because this is probably the greatest threat to our Constitution and our liberties today. And what we don't know is this thing is being used like a spiritual cancer that is eating away at everything that is valuable to us, virtuous, spiritual, etc. So today's subject, incontrovertible evidence that the 14th Amendment is unconstitutional. Now, let's do this, Steve. Believe on the Lord Jesus Christ, and thou shalt be saved. That's where it all begins, folks, but that's not where it ends. So with that in mind, what we're going to do here is I'm going to begin by introducing the Unconstitutional Amendment, Part 1. And the reason that there's 30 pages of information in this, when I put this all together, there's 30 pages of this. And I'm not going to rush through it, because it's going to demand concentration, thinking about what is being said, and then processing that information. Otherwise, you have information that's correct information, but you don't see how it fits. And if somebody walked up, you say, "Oh, no," they'll say something to you that the government says, and that this is the right thing, and you wouldn't be able to knock that thing out of the ballpark if you had to, because you don't have the evidence. So first of all, why don't you read this first sentence right here, Steve?
The claimed purpose of the 14th Amendment was fake news, because its claimed purpose had already been accomplished by the 13th Amendment.
Okay, look here. Here's what we're saying. In the chronological order, the 13th Amendment preceded the 14th Amendment. And what happened is when the 13th Amendment was ratified correctly, a little later time, they're going to propose the 14th Amendment, and what they're going to tell you is the 14th Amendment is valuable in the same way the 13th was. So the 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution legally abolished, listen to me please, it legally abolished slavery. Now here's the thing. I know there are going to be people out there saying, well, wait a minute, just a second. No, it didn't. No, we still got slavery. We still got racial. Excuse me, stop for a minute, will you please? Just listen to what I'm saying. This is why we have to realize the words that are being used. The 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution legally abolished slavery. That doesn't mean it stopped. It's just that the government says, this is it, no more. No, you can't do this. Now, listen to the 13th Amendment and listen to what it says. This is part of the Constitution now. This is right. It was done the right way. It says neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime, whereof the party, that's the person who is a slave or involuntary has committed a crime, says, whereof the party shall have been duly convicted. In other words, you can't enslave somebody voluntarily or any other way, except where that party has committed a crime, okay? And that shall exist. No slavery, no involuntary servitude shall exist in the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction, subject to where that slave or that involuntary servitude is, okay? That canceled slavery legally in the United States of America. Now, when that happened, there is no place in the United States where you can legally own a slave. Now, let me point out something to those of you out here who say, well, I'm a white man, okay? You're a white person. What do we know about all this? Hold it just a second. I know that I have not been a part of slavery. I understand what was taking place. That was back then. I do know what the 13th Amendment says, and what I want my public to understand is I grew up in the North, and as a result of that, in my great-grandparents' day and age, I had family members who served as a part of the Underground Railroad. In other words, we were involved in that. Not me, but my relatives were. So I don't own any of that, okay? So 13th Amendment, slavery is abolished. Now, read this one, Steve.
The proposed 13th Amendment that formally abolished slavery in the United States was passed by Congress on January 31st, 1865, and ratified by the states on December 6, 1865.
Okay, so here's the issue. The dates are going to be pretty important to us also, because as you're seeing some of this come out of Supreme Courts and rulings and stuff, there are going to be dates out there. Say, gee whiz, which one happened first? Well, it's pretty interesting and important to know when things happen. So, for example, here, the 13th Amendment was proposed. What that means is there was a joint proposal. The House of Representatives and the Senate proposed this bill, okay, proposed this amendment. Then what happened is it went to the House, then it went to the Senate, and when they actually passed that, you have to have, constitutionally, you have to have 2/3 of the Senate and 2/3 of the House pass that bill before it can move on to the next step, okay? So just understand, this proposal took place in 1865 in January. Then not 11 or 12, nearly 12 months later, it was actually passed. The House 2/3, at least 2/3. The Senate 2/3. Yes, it's ready to go. So what we need to do now is find out what's going to happen next. But the 13th Amendment, we need to know what the 13th Amendment's purpose was. See, that's this one up here. So what was the purpose of that 13th Amendment when they passed it? Okay, tell us what this 13th Amendment was for?
The 13th Amendment to the United States Constitution legally abolished slavery and involuntary servitude, except as punishment for a crime.
So what was the 13th Amendment for?
Just that, to abolish slavery.
See, and what? Yeah, that's exactly right. And in that period of time, this was when the Civil War was, in that during period, okay? So this 13th Amendment was passed to legally abolish slavery. Okay, I have a question then, because we actually talked about the 14th Amendment up here. The claimed purpose of the 14th Amendment was fake news, and it was fake news. What they claimed was really not right. Okay, so we're going to have a 14th Amendment. Oh, what are you going to do that for? Well, let's see. Here's why it's going to be abolish slavery. Well, excuse me, just a second. When did the 13th?
Already did that in the 13th Amendment.
See, the 13th Amendment already done that. So what that means is there must have been a hidden meaning behind that 14th Amendment. So here's the issue. I asked the question, if the claimed purpose of the 14th Amendment was to abolish slavery, why do you need the 14th Amendment when the 13th Amendment has already been accomplished for that purpose? And I said, you know what? That should have raised some eyebrows. It sure should have. Now, what we're going to see here later on, though, and I think this is extremely important, because later on in our history, beyond this, the Democratic Party actually was part and parcel of being pro-slavery. But the truth of the matter is, when this happened, guess what? The majority in Congress were Republicans. And guess what? Who was the president? Abraham Lincoln, who was a Republican. Now, hold on to that for just a moment. What we need to see then is answering that question. 13th Amendment, it abolished slavery. 14th Amendment comes along and says, well, it's going to do the same thing. Well, why are you going to do the same thing? Must be something wrong there. So here's what we need to do. We need to take a look at some important dates. These may not be important to you tonight, but if you're going to process this information, you need to know what happened when and why it happened at the point in time that it did it, okay? Otherwise, hey, just a bunch of information out here. So let's take a look at some important dates. First of all, what was this?
1861, Abraham Lincoln assumed the 16th presidency of the United States.
So here he is. And by the way, let me point this out. We know the Emancipation Proclamation. We've heard that. And people hear that thing and say, oh, yeah, that's when Abraham Lincoln emancipated the slaves. That was in 1861, okay? And that was through an executive order. And guess what? That executive order is going to last about that long till you get another president, okay? So the issue is, it's not the Emancipation Proclamation that freed the slaves. Let's take a look here. January 13th, January 31st, 1965. What happened then?
The 13th Amendment was passed by Congress.
And what did that do, Steve?
What did the
13th Amendment do?
It abolished slavery.
That abolished
slavery. Made it legal.
And did it legally. Now, that was on January 31st. Well, what happened on April the 9th, 1865, 4 months later?
The Civil War ended.
The Civil War ended, okay? Now, we've already passed this 13th Amendment to free the slave before the Civil War ended, okay? Now, on April 14th, that's 5 days later, guess what happened?
Lincoln was assassinated.
Lincoln was assassinated. That was just 5 days after the Civil War was ended, okay? Now, what happened? The next day, something else happened. What happened?
Next day, Andrew Johnson became the 17th president.
So after Lincoln was assassinated, we find that the next day, Andrew Johnson then becomes the 17th president. Now, in that same year, April is about eight months later. What happened on that day?
December 6, 1865, the 13th Amendment was ratified by the states.
Okay, now look here. You go back here. See, we have to understand the process. On January 31st, the Congress, the total Congress, passed this 13th Amendment. But now what happens is you take that and you send it out to the states, okay? However, what happens is once the 13th Amendment is passed, then there is a constitutional provision that you have to send that to the president. And the president can take several days, and he can either sign it or not sign it. If he signs it, it becomes law. Then it's going to go out to the states for ratification. If the president doesn't sign it within a certain amount of time, it goes back to the Congress, and they vote on it again. And if it passes, then guess what? It becomes law even though the president has signed it. So here's the issue. It actually passed on January 31st, and then on the 6th of December that same year, it was actually ratified by the states, okay? Now, in 1867, this is 2 years later. Go ahead.
The Reconstruction Acts passed.
How many?
3.
There were 3 Reconstruction Acts that were passed.
Mm-hmm.
Now, here's again where we're going to get into some trouble. This is where part of the area where the Congress just went absolutely, not just Congress, the federal government went absolutely wild at this point in time. And when you talk about 3 Reconstruction Acts, I would suggest to you that the larger portion of Americans don't have a clue about what that was. Oh, maybe that's building a bridge, or Reconstruction, yeah, we're going to build some highways or whatever. No, we'll see what those were here in the course of this study, okay? Now, that's 1867 to 1868. Now, in 1868 again, on July the 28th, what happens?
The 14th Amendment was unconstitutionally ratified.
Absolutely correct. So what we have then is we have the 14th Amendment that has been proposed, and what we're going to see is we haven't said anything about the process just yet. Only the fact that at this point in time, it was unconstitutionally ratified, which means then that 3/4 of the states out here actually voted to ratify this. But there was something about that we're going to take a look at.
Would have.
Yes. See, in other words, it under normal conditions, it would have been ratified. So what we're going to do is we're going to find out something about that ratification process. In fact, even the proposal, we're going to see. What happened when they sent it to the president? What happened when it came back? Let's take a look at this. Now, in 1947, this is from 1868 up to 1947, and in our last session, which would have been on Monday night, I made reference to Justice Hugo Black. And here's what happened. In that conversation that I had with our people on Monday night, Judge Hugo Black is going to make a statement that makes it very clear to people living today exactly what this 14th Amendment was to do. Now, here's the issue. If we don't know the constitutional process in the United States of America, we might hear Judge Hugo Black and say, well, okay, I understand that, so what's wrong with that? Watch this. Go ahead and tell us what he said here.
Justice Hugo Black stated the intended purpose of the 14th Amendment was to make the Bill of Rights applicable to the states, just the opposite of what the authors intended.
Now, that statement is absolutely correct. The tragedy here again, though, is that when you're talking about the Bill of Rights, people in our country, majority of people in our country, don't have any idea what the Bill of Rights is supposed to do. Listen. We started out with charters in the United States. The people in England and places like that would give a certain group of people a charter to come over to the United States, give them a piece of territory, and they were supposed to do something with that, okay? But there was always something written about what they were supposed to do and make out of that particular piece of property, that area where they were going, okay, to make the charter. What happened then? You went from there. You went to from a charter piece to a colony, okay? Then you went from a colony to a state, okay? And now what happens in this process, we find that the 13 states then get together and they pass the Constitution, and after the Constitution is passed, you get more states that are coming in, and but before they ratified the Constitution, the people in the colony said, no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to do that because we believe that once this government gets started, the information in this Constitution, these 7 articles, is not clear. And the first thing we know is you're going to be jumping down our throat just like they did in England. You're going to be taking all of our freedoms away. That's why we came here, and we're not going to stand for that. We're not going to ratify it. So George Washington says, okay, I'll tell you what I'll do. elect me president, and the first thing that I'll do is we'll form a Bill of Rights. They agreed to that. So they ratified the Constitution, and the first thing that George Washington did was go to work on that Bill of Rights. Now, here's the issue. Remember this. The Bill of Rights is not giving you any right at all. Please listen to that. Many people think the Bill of Rights is telling me what I can do. No, the Bill of Rights is telling the government what it can't prohibit. You see? So everything in the Bill of Rights is directed straight at the government and telling, listen, this Constitution gives the sovereignty to the people out here. We're going to give you a little bit here and tell you what you can do out here as federal government, and that's protect the people down here who are sovereign. But what happened now is that when you know that the Bill of Rights was not written to you, to limit you, but it was limit the federal government, now what happens, the federal government's going to take that 14th Amendment, turn that around, and say, we're loose, we're free, but now this 14th Amendment says all these 10 amendments, they apply to you, and this is what you can't do. You see it? It just flip-flopped it, okay? Now, when you're ignorant, when you're stupid, when you've been dumbed down, don't know what this stuff is, you just believe the first person that comes along that seems like they have credibility.
Okay, Doctor, you're saying so they were trying to say that Hugo Black.
Who's they?
That Hugo Black's doing this flipped it around was that applied only to the federal government staying out of our business, and they're trying to say now the states have to. They have to stay out of the federal government now, instead of staying out of our business, can interfere with the state business.
That's exactly, not just the state, but the states and you, okay? So what happened then, and here's what Hugo Black said. Read that one more time.
Justice Hugo Black stated that the intended purpose of the 14th Amendment was to make the Bill of Rights applicable to the states, just the opposite of what the authors intended. Now I get it. Okay. First I was thinking the Bill of Rights was for the individual, that they're trying to apply it to the states instead of just to the federal government.
What they're trying to apply that to. Now look here. Someone says, well, wait a minute, just a second. The First Amendment says Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion, it said, or abridging the free exercise thereof. It talks about free speech. Well, listen, you don't get free speech from the government. As a matter of fact, the First Amendment is telling the government, you can't prohibit this. You can't stop this. Now, what happens, you need to realize that you are a citizen. If you're a citizen, you are a citizen of the state first, and then you're a citizen of the United States, okay? So what happens, this bill was telling the federal government, the Bill of Rights, telling the federal government, you can't stop these things down here. Now watch this. In a state constitution, they may take some of that away, but the government can't do anything about that. See, it has no jurisdiction there. That's the federal government. That's right. So what we need to realize is this 14th Amendment is now taking the Bill of Rights and making them applicable to you to stop you, but it was meant to stop the federal government. So they're meant to be protections for you and me, okay? Now, notice this. What about this Bill of Rights? Go ahead.
The Bill of Rights was ratified to guarantee that the federal government would not take away the inalienable rights of we the people.
So you see, when the colonies were putting together the Constitution, they said, no, we don't want this. The words in this thing are rather nebulous. They're not clear. And here's what they would say. I know you're telling me that we believe that's what this means here now. But what about 2 weeks from now? What about 7 years from now? What about 150 years from now? And this is exactly what's happened, okay? We're not holding to the intended purpose of what it meant back then. So the Bill of Rights was ratified to guarantee that the federal government would not take away our inalienable rights. Just read the first 8 amendments and see what it says. Okay, now watch this. Next sentence here.
The unconstitutional 14th Amendment reversed the intentions of the Bill of Rights so that government could control every aspect of our life.
See, that's what happened.
That's what the original framers were fearing.
That's exactly right. But what happened is we're being told that 14th Amendment was simply
yeah.
to free the slaves. Excuse me, I'm not pro-slavery. I don't like that idea. But the truth of the matter is, we were told that that's what the 14th Amendment, we're being told that's what the 14th Amendment was supposed to do. But we now know that if the 14th Amendment is doing that, why did it have to do it? Because the 13th Amendment did it.
Exactly.
Okay? Now, how about this next statement here?
Because of the 14th Amendment, the inalienable rights of we the people have become privileges granted to us by the federal government. Privileges granted can be taken away just as fast as they are granted.
So here's the issue. We need to make a distinction between an inalienable right that's given to us by God. The government gives us privileges. God is, if the rights that God has provided for us are inalienable, He can't even take them away. Otherwise, it's not God.
Yeah, that's right.
So here's the issue. He gave us the inalienable rights. This is natural law, okay? And the truth of the matter is now, the federal government says, oh, no, 14th Amendment, it applies to the states, it applies to the Bill of Rights. This belongs to us now here. We'll tell you what to do. And wait a minute, just a second. Here, I'll tell you what, though. We'll give you some privileges. We'll allow you to drive your car. We'll allow you to get married as long as you do the license deal. They're giving us the privilege. But remember, the privilege today may not be a privilege tomorrow. The difference between a privilege and an inalienable right, the inalienable right comes from God. It can't be taken away by anybody. You can't even give it away. It's ours. But the privileges that come from the government say, well, this week you can do this, but next week, sorry. Okay? Now let me read an introductory note to this. And here's what we need to understand. Coming up here in this study, tonight, tomorrow, the next, whenever, however long it takes, in view of the evidence available. Now, what does that mean? What does that imply?
What we know up to this date.
Okay.
About it.
Okay. Now here, in view of the evidence available, what this is saying is we have available evidence. Okay. And here's the available evidence. What it's going to do? We have evidence that the fact of invalidity. The fact of the invalidity of the 14th Amendment is blatant and irrefutable. You can't refute it. I don't care how much you argue. You can't refute the facts. So in view of the fact that, watch this. In view of the fact, stop right there. Never mind the obvious corruption in the courts at that time, the invalid amendment was challenged. So what happened during that period of time, the court system was corrupt. Okay? Does this sound familiar? The court okay, now, see, the court system at that point in time was corrupt, obviously corrupt, and it's recorded for us, irrefutable. So it had obvious corruption in the courts at that time. Now watch this. At the time the invalid amendment was challenged. So here's what happened. Someone said, excuse me, that constitutional or that amendment right there, that is invalid. It is unconstitutional. So they said, okay, let's take it to court. So the court, it goes to the court, and the court turns a blind eye like this and talks about everything except the 14th Amendment and never make a decision about the 14th Amendment. They may give a decision on something else while they're there, but they refuse to take a look at that 14th Amendment and say, oh yeah, that certainly is, it is unconstitutional. So this says here, the obvious corruption of the courts at the time the invalid amendment was challenged. The courts today appear to operate under the same invalid 14th Amendment, and it would hardly be presumable that a court challenge. Okay, so wait a minute, just say, let's take that thing to court. Well, if the courts aren't any different today, and they're just as corrupt today as they were back there, guess what? You're going to get the same answer, the same response. So it would be hardly be presumable that a court challenge, regardless of the aroused public sentiment. That means you and I and a whole bunch of people get upset about this and say, hey, let's take this thing to court. When it gets out there, they go off this direction, they talk about everything else but this, and never render a decision, okay? It's a matter, so how are we going to do this? How are we going to handle that? Here it is right here. It's a matter of we the people. It's for us, for we the people to take into hand We have to do this. And that's what I'm trying to do here. I know that someone said, well, it's never going to go anywhere. Well, I'll tell you what, it won't be because I didn't try.
Will you back up and read one sentence before that, too, and elaborate on that?
Okay. However, the unconstitutionality of the 14th Amendment is not a matter for courts to decide.
That's a good point.
So somebody said, well, wait a minute, how are we going to handle it? Oh, we need to take it to court. Well, we'll see something about that, because taking it to court won't amount to a hill of beans. So here it is. It's a matter for we the people to take into hand. How are we going to do that? To instruct the legislatures of their respective states. So what that means is we have to instruct our own legislators. And I can tell you right now, I've talked to some of them, and they won't even listen.
Oh, no.
They will not even listen. And it's an amazing thing. So here it is. The unconstitutionality of the 14th Amendment is not a matter for courts to decide. It's a matter for we the people to take into hand, and that is to instruct our legislatures of their respective states to declare the 14th Amendment invalid. So what happened in the state of Arkansas, for example, we could get our legislators together in the House and the Senate, and guess what they could do? They could deal with this in such a way that they said, from henceforth, this thing is invalid. We're not doing anything about this in the state of Arkansas. Take that thing and stick it in your ear. Okay? Now, with that in mind, see, so we're going to instruct our legislatures about how it's invalid, while also declaring the unalienable rights. So, okay, this is invalid. This is invalid over here. It's been taking our rights away. So here's what we do. We're going to teach you how to deal with this, and then we're going out over here and we're going to tell the people about it. We're going to tell them. Okay? So while also declaring the unalienable rights of all legal residents. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, oh, yeah, but here in the meantime, though, notice the words here. While also declaring the unalienable rights of all what? Legal residents in the state, regardless of race, color, or creed. Now, that's our introductory note there, okay? Now what we want to do is we want to take into consideration the real document. And this is the 14th Amendment is unconstitutional, and Judge L.H. Perez made these statements. So here's what he was from Louisiana. And what we want to do is find out what he said. So read this statement here, Sid.
The purported, alleged 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution is and should be held to be ineffective, invalid, null, having no legal or binding force, void, unconstitutional for the following 7 reasons.
So Judge
had it right.
Judge Perez is going to give us 7 reasons why this thing is unconstitutional. And that's why it's called an alleged, a purported, an alleged 14th Amendment. It was so-called. It really isn't, see. A so-called 14th Amendment, he says it should be held, look at these words, it should be held what?
To be ineffective.
Okay, now watch that. What that means is, here's what they're telling you. Here's what you're being told it says. But the truth of the matter is, no matter what they said, it is ineffective. It has absolutely no application to your life. Okay? Not only is it ineffective, is what?
Invalid.
Invalid. I mean, just same thing, okay? Another word.
Null.
Null. What does null have?
Having no legal or binding force.
So if you violated this thing according to the government and their understanding, there's no binding force. Nothing there. And it's also what?
Void.
Void. All these are synonymous terms. And what's the next one?
Unconstitutional.
For how many reasons?
7 reasons.
7 reasons. So he's going to give us 7 reasons why this thing is unconstitutional. Okay, let's move on from here. Number 1.
The joint resolution proposing the said amendment was not submitted or adopted by a constitutional Congress. Article 1, Section 3, and Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution.
We're going to deal with those. Some of them, well, what do you know, that was a big deal, you know, Article 1, Section 3, Article 5, yeah, whole lot. What does it say? We're going to see that in a minute. But note this, the joint resolution that was proposing said amendment, what that means is the Senate and the House of Representatives in the federal Congress, They had this same resolution that they were going to vote on, okay? But it's a proposed amendment. All this has been drafted. Now they're going to take it into the Senate and the House. They're going to wrestle with that thing, okay? And notice that when they're doing this, 2/3 of the Senate has to vote affirmatively. 2/3 of the House has to vote affirmatively. Now, when that happens, what we need to realize is that when that joint resolution was proposed, it was not submitted or adopted by the Constitutional Congress. It was proposed. They were supposed to be voting on it, but it was not submitted. No, it wasn't. It was never submitted or adopted by a Constitutional Congress. And what we want to see here is what are the guidelines in Article 1, Section 3 and Article 5 that tells us how you go about adopting that. And it was the process, the very first process was not followed constitutionally. That in itself would negate it, okay? So that's strike number one. Point number two here.
The joint resolution was not submitted to the President for his approval. That was in Article 1, Section 7.
So in Article 1, Section 3 and Article 5, it tells you how to go about adopting it. Once it is adopted and once it is passed in the House and the Senate by 2/3 vote, then the responsibility is to take that thing and send it to the President to sign it to make it law. And we have in Article 1, Section 7, this isn't deep. Get yourself a Constitution, Google it, Bing it, and read the thing. You could read the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. You could probably read the whole thing in 3 hours. So the joint resolution was not submitted to the President for approval. Just get the picture.
That's the illegal process.
See, what happens is they didn't adopt it right, but it was supposed to have been passed, and then they don't submit it to the President. It's supposed to go there constitutionally. Point number 3, Steve.
The proposed 14th Amendment was rejected by more than 1/4 of all the states then in the Union, and it was never ratified by 3/4 of all of the states in the Union.
Okay, so here in point 3, Judge Perez is telling us 2 things up here, and in the third one, the proposed 14th Amendment, that's back here, where it wasn't adopted constitution. The proposed 14th Amendment was rejected by more than 1/4 of the states. Okay? Now, hang on there. That's the 1/4 of the states that were in the Union. And it was never ratified. Not only did they reject it when it would be proposed, it was never ratified by 3/4 of the states in the Union. So when you propose it, it's got to be ratified by 2/3. When you send it to the President, he signs it. You send it out to the states, and now it takes 3/4 of the states to ratify it. So it was not submitted or adopted properly in the Constitution in the Congress. The joint resolution was not submitted to the President. And here, when they were voting on to ratify, they didn't have 3/4 of the states. So let's watch this. Look at the numbers. This is why you need to do a little bit of math, okay? So here's the issue. At the time the proposal was supposed to have been passed, the President was supposed to have signed it, and now what happens is there are 37 states in the Union at this point in time, okay? In 1800s, 37 states. So if you need 3/4 of those states to ratify it, you need 28 states to ratify it. The only problem is, how many?
Only 21 legally ratified.
Only 21 legally ratified it.
Not enough.
So I said, okay, now if 38 states are needed, 28 states ratify it, and are needed, 28 are needed, and you only have 21, you fall 7 short.
Exactly.
So I say, okay, you decide. Okay, come on out there. You're telling me that this thing is valid. I've just given 3 reasons here to start with why it's invalid. Now watch this. Read this next statement.
There were 37 states in the Union at the time, so ratification by at least 28 was necessary to make the amendment an integral part of the Constitution. So actually only 21 states legally ratified it, so it fell short of ratification. Over and out.
So it's not valid, okay? Now, what happens though? We're going to see how they actually rationalize and how they got around this. Okay. So here's the issue: the undisputed record. Listen to that word I just said. Undisputed record. All this information is in the congressional records. You can read about most of it on the internet. Okay? So the undisputed record, attested by official journals. These are official journals that have all this in them. And the unanimous writings of historians. So not only is it part of the official records, the many writers and historians have actually proclaimed this. But guess what? If you're not teaching history in the public schools, guess what? You don't know what this says. So here it is. The undisputed record, attested by official journals and the unanimous writings of historians, establishes these events as occurring in 1867 and 1868. Now what we're going to do is we're going to see some things that happened concerning this 14th Amendment during this period of time. Undisputed records, okay? Concerning the proposed 14th Amendment. The proposed. Now, you remember, you write this thing, you propose it. Then what you're going to do is you're going to send it to the president. You're going to send out the states and have it ratified, okay? So watch this. The Unconstitutional Congress. First of all, wait a minute, just saying. I thought it was an unconstitutional 14th Amendment. What does this say?
Unconstitutional Congress.
So not only do you have an unconstitutional amendment, the reason you had an unconstitutional amendment is because you had an unconstitutional Congress. Wait a minute. How did that happen? Watch this. The United States Constitution provides. Read it. It's very simple. Article 1, Section 3. You aren't that deep into the Constitution where this is going to come up. So Article 1, Section 3. See, Article 1 is the first article of 7 on the Constitution. So Article 1 says what?
The Senate of the United States shall be composed of 2 senators from each state.
Okay, now just keep that in mind. That isn't deep. But what happened, you're going to find out how they got around that. Okay? Now, the 2 senators from each state. That's Article 1, Section 3. Well, what about Article 5 that also has something to say about this?
No state, without its consent, shall be deprived of its equal suffrage, a right to vote, in the Senate.
So when you have your 2 senators in the Senate, so you got your states that you're dealing with, 38 states, 37 states. You're dealing with these states, and you got 2 senators in Congress, okay? So you bring something up and you say, okay, let's see, we're going to vote on this. They say, wait a minute, excuse me, Arkansas, you can't do this. You're not allowed to vote on this. Michigan, you can't vote on this. Wait a minute, what do you mean? Article 5 says no state without its consent. No, we're from Arkansas, we don't want to vote on this. So no state without its consent shall be deprived of its equal suffrage. In other words, senators from Arkansas are equal to senators from Florida, from Maine, from Michigan, or whatever. So you can't stop these people from voting. They have a right to vote in the Senate. Okay, now watch this. Read this thing right here.
The fact that 23 senators had been unlawfully excluded from the U.S. Senate in order to secure a 2/3 vote for adoption of the joint resolution proposing the 14th Amendment is shown by resolutions of protest adopted by the following state legislators.
So what happened here, you're getting ready to vote on this 14th Amendment, and the Senate is telling you can't vote, 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 you can't vote. Well, what happens is if you choose those people that you know who are going to vote against the 14th Amendment, and you don't allow them to vote, now you get down to say, okay, let's say you got 21 senators now, okay, 21 states rather. You don't have 38. Now you've got 21 states. Well, guess what? 3/4 of 28 is a whole lot less than 3/4 of 34. So what happened is, at this point in time, the fact that 23 senators had been unlawfully excluded from the U.S. Senate in order to secure 2/3 vote for adoption. That's just to get the thing adopted after it had been proposed. So that's why we said back earlier that this was an illegal Congress. You see, it didn't have representatives from all the states.
Because it says up there, Article 5, they should not be deprived from the right to vote.
That's exactly
But
right.
they were.
And that's why, see, the unconstitutional Congress. So when I said we had an unconstitutional amendment, but in order to get there, you had to have an unconstitutional Congress that would pass this thing. So if you pass it with an illegal Congress, all I got to do is say, hey, yeah, it was passed, it was ratified. Yeah, we did it okay. See? Now watch this down here. So, the fact that 23 senators had been unlawfully excluded. We'll see how that happened. Now, what happened, he says here, notice this. He said this exclusion is shown by the resolutions of protest adopted by the following state legislatures. So what happens here is New Jersey says, wait a minute, we were excluded. We couldn't do this. This is record, Steve. It's in writing.
It's undeniable.
So New Jersey legislature, by resolution, that's over New Jersey now, by resolution of March 27th, 1868, protested as follows. And here's what they said. In their resolution, here's what they said. The said proposed amendment, 14th, not having yet received the assent of 3/4 of the states. See, they need them to do that. But it hasn't reached that yet. It says, which is necessary to make it valid, the natural and constitutional right of this state to withdraw its assent is undeniable. In other words, we can withdraw what we have done, okay? He said that it being necessary by the Constitution that every amendment to the same should be proposed by 2/3 of both houses of Congress, the authors of the said proposition, for the purpose of securing the assent of the requisite majority. In other words, we're going to need a majority here now, 2/3, determined to, and did, what did they do? Exclude from the said two houses 80 representatives from 11 states of the Union. Upon the pretense, why? Upon the pretense that there were no such states in the Union. See, this is this during the Civil War. Now, what happened is they were telling everybody these states are excluded. Civil War. They were out of the Union. But the truth of the matter was they weren't out of the Union, and that's why, upon the pretense that there were no such states in the Union, but finding that 2/3 of the remainder, 2/3 of the remainder of said houses could not be brought to assent to the said proposition, they deliberately formed and carried out the design of mutilating the integrity of the United States Senate, and without any pretext or justification, or other than the possession of the power without the right, and in palpable violation of the Constitution, ejected a member from their own body. In other words, you're ejecting people from the Senate, representing this state, and thus practically denied to New Jersey its equal suffrage in the Senate, and thereby nominally secured the vote of 2/3 of the said houses. That's New Jersey. In Alabama, the Alabama legislature protested against being deprived of representation in the Senate of the U.S. Congress. Okay, that was in the Alabama House Journal. Texas, the Texas legislature, by resolution, just like they did above, on October 15th, 1866, protested as follows. Here's what they said. The amendment to the Constitution proposed by this joint resolution, that's the amendment, proposed by this joint resolution of Article 14, 14th Amendment, is presented to the legislature of Texas for its action thereon under Article 5 of that Constitution. This Article 5, providing the mode of making amendments to that instrument, contemplates the participation by all the states through the representatives in Congress in proposing amendments. As representatives in Congress, for nearly 1/3 of the states were excluded. See, they're recognizing it too. 1/3 of the states were excluded from Congress proposing the amendments. The constitutional requirement was not complied with. It was violated in letter and in spirit, and the proposing of these amendments to the states which were excluded from all participation in their initiation in Congress. What is it? It is nullity. That means this thing is of no value.
Not valid.
Check this out. Now, how about this? The Arkansas legislature,
Yeah.
by a resolution on December 17, 1866, protested as follows. The Constitution authorized 2/3 of both houses of Congress to propose amendments. We know that. And as 11 states were excluded from deliberation and decision upon the one now submitted, the conclusion is inevitable that it is not proposed by legal authority, but in palpable violation of the Constitution.
Wow.
Okay? The Georgia legislature, by resolution on November 1866, protested as follows. Since the reorganization of the state government, and this was after the war, okay, reorganized the government, in state government, Georgia has elected senators and representatives. So has every other state. They have been arbitrarily refused admission to their seats. See, they show up, they get this new government in Georgia, and they said, "Oh, we got our senators, we got our representatives elected. Go ahead, go to Washington." They get to Washington, they won't let them sit down, they won't let them seat, won't allow them in. So they have been arbitrarily refused admission to their seats, not on the ground that the qualifications of the members elected did not conform to the fourth paragraph up above it. Second section, first article of the Constitution, but because their right of representation was denied by a portion of the states having equal, the portion of the states of those that were there and said, you can't come in here, having equal but not greater rights than themselves. They have, in fact, been forcibly excluded. And inasmuch as all legislative power granted by the states to the Congress is defined, and this power of exclusion is not among the powers expressly or by implication, the assemblies at the capital of representatives from a portion of the states to the exclusion of representatives of another portion cannot be a constitutional Congress when the representation of each state forms an integral part of the whole.
Oh, yeah. And
They go on now. Says this amendment is tendered to Georgia. So in other words, you got this amendment, it's supposed to be proposed, and you got 2/3 of the House and the Senate have illegally voted on this, okay? So they send it down to Georgia. Says this amendment is tendered to Georgia for ratification under the power in the Constitution which authorizes 2/3 of Congress to propose amendments. We have endeavored to establish that Georgia had a right in the first place as part of the Congress to act upon the question, shall these amendments be proposed? Every other excluded state had the same right. The first constitutional privilege has been arbitrarily denied. Had these amendments been submitted to a constitutional Congress, they would have never been proposed to the states. 2/3 of the whole Congress never would have proposed to 11, let's say that again, 2/3 of the whole Congress would never have proposed to 11 states voluntarily to reduce their political power in the Union. In other words, we're going to pass this thing. How about you guys just get out of here?
Yeah,
you just go on up. Said they're not going to propose that. So to voluntarily reduce their political power in the Union, and at the same time disenfranchise the larger portion of the intellect, integrity, and patriotism of the 11 co-equal states. Georgia. What did Florida do? The Florida resolution on December the 5th, 1866 protested. Let this alteration be made in the organic system, and some new and more startling demands may or may not be required by the predominant party previous to allowing the 10 states now unlawfully and unconstitutionally deprived of the representation to the halls of the national legislature. They're saying, look, we're up there, you won't let us in, you won't seat us. Their right of representation is guaranteed by the Constitution of this country, and there is no act, not even that of rebellion, can deprive them of this exercise. South Carolina, November 27, 1866, protested. 11 of the southern states, including South Carolina, are deprived of the representation in Congress. Although their senators and representatives have been duly elected, yes, they were duly elected, and have presented themselves for the purpose of taking their seats, their credentials have, in most instances, been laid upon the table without reading, or have been referred to a committee who have failed to make any report on the subject. In short, Congress has refused to exercise its constitutional functions and decide either upon the election, the return, or the qualification of the selected states and people to represent us. Some of the senators and representatives of the southern states were prepared to take the oath. Listen to this. They were prepared to take the test oath, but even these have been persistently ignored. They're there. They're getting ready to take the oath. They won't let them do it. And they kept out of the seats to which they were entitled under the Constitution and laws. Henceforth, this amendment has not been proposed by two-thirds of both houses of a legally constituted Congress and is not constitutionally or legitimately before a single legislature for ratification. North Carolina said. It says, the federal Constitution declares in substance that Congress shall consist of a House of Representatives composed of members apportioned among the respective states in ratio to their population, and a Senate composed of 2 members from each state. And in the article which concerns amendments, it is expressly provided that no state without its consent shall be deprived of its equal suffrage in the state. The contemplated amendment, what's that?
In the Senate, it's in the state.
Yeah, in the Senate, right. Said the contemplated amendment was not proposed to the states by a Congress thus constituted. At the time of its adoption, the 11 seceding states were deprived of representation, both in the Senate and House, although they all, except the state of Texas, had senators and representatives duly elected and claiming their privileges under the Constitution. In the consequence of this, these states had no voice on the important question of proposing the amendment. Had they been allowed to give their votes, the proposition would doubtless have failed to command the required two-thirds majority. See, that's why they did this.
Exactly, keep it from happening.
Yes. So if the votes of these states are necessary to a valid ratification of the amendment, they were equally necessary on the question of proposing it to the states. For it would be difficult, in the opinion of the committee, to show by what process in logic men of intelligence could arrive at a different conclusion. Okay? Now, so what we've seen there is all these states then. They had their own resolutions saying, look, we recognize this was unconstitutional. See, you had an unconstitutional Congress. We saw that they didn't propose it correctly. They didn't send it to the president, and it wasn't ratified constitutionally. Now, the unconstitutional 14th Amendment was not submitted to the president. So we're going to go back and pick that up. That's exactly right. They proposed it, two-thirds in both houses. The House and the Senate passed it. It's on to the president. But the unconstitutional 14th Amendment was not submitted to the president. Joint resolution ineffective. Read this.
Article 1, Section 7 provides that not only every bill which shall have been passed by the House of Representatives and the Senate of the United States of Congress.
Okay, now watch this. Let's go back and you did that right. But what I want you to do is, how many bills? Right here. Every bill which has been passed. What's going to happen to it? Here it is.
Yeah, every order, resolution, or vote to which the concurrence of the Senate and House of Representatives may be necessary, except on a question of adjournment, shall be presented to the President of the United States.
So here's the issue.
That's got to be done.
If it's an order, and this is a resolution, okay, or a vote, to which the concurrence of the Senate, in other words, you have to have two-thirds of the Senate and two-thirds of the House. It may be necessary, except on question of adjournment, shall be presented to the President of the United States. And we've already seen up above, they didn't do that.
All those steps they didn't do.
That's
it's also like, why would they present something to the president in the first place that wasn't right or legal?
Okay. So now, how about this? Go ahead and read this.
The joint resolution proposing the 14th Amendment, that's the 14 statutes at large, was never presented to the President of the United States for his approval.
Stop right there. It was what? Never. It was
never.
What? Never.
And that's history. That's fact.
It's written down. It was never presented. No, watch this. Go ahead.
As President Andrew Johnson stated in his message on June 22nd, 1866, validated in the Senate Journal, the 39th Congress, first section, page 563, and House Journal, page 889. Like
it's even tell you where you go read it.
Exactly. It's not like we're making this up. It's real.
It was never presented. And what happened is President Johnson said so much. He wrote it down. So here's
Wow.
the third deal. Now I think maybe at this point in time, Steve, let me go down to the bottom page here. Yeah, I think for those of you out there who received the notes, we may be able to do this in 2 sessions, because what happened here, this is where the notes ended that I sent out to the people.
Okay,
So listen, I will fix this up. I will send it to you once we're done here. But I want you to realize that from here down, we just ran out of their notes.
Okay, right, gotcha.
Now, what we're doing
We
now,
can see it, they can't.
that's exactly right. So here's the third proposed amendment, number 3. Proposed amendment never ratified by 3/4 of the states. So what we had, the proposal was not voted on correctly, and then it was sent to the president. He didn't send it to the president. That's it.
And then I couldn't sign it. They never sent it in the first place.
Now what they're going to do is they're going to take the proposed amendment and they're going to send it to the states
to be ratified. Bypass all the other things.
Okay, that's exactly right. So here's the issue: proposed amendment never ratified by the 3/4 states. It's going to go out there. But here's what happens. It was never ratified. You had to have, there were 37 states at the time. 3/4 is going to take 28 needed, and only 21 ratified it. Close the shop, go home.
That's it.
That's it.
It's not legal.
Okay. So let me read this one here.
Go ahead.
Number 1, pretermitting the ineffectiveness. What does that word pretermitting it mean? It means excluding the ineffectiveness of the said resolution as above, points 1 and 2, okay? 15 states out of them 37 states of the Union rejected the proposed 14th Amendment between the date of its submission to the states by the Secretary of State and on June 16, 1866 and March 24, 1868. So they went out on the 16th of June, 1866, and by March 24, 1868, thereby further nullifying said resolution and making it impossible for ratification by the constitutionally required 3/4 of such states. See, it went out, but only 21 ratified. It fell short. So it's impossible to ratify that thing. For example, Texas rejected the 14th Amendment. Georgia rejected the 14th Amendment. Florida rejected the 14th Amendment. Alabama rejected the 14th Amendment. North Carolina rejected the 14th Amendment. Arkansas rejected the 14th Amendment. South Carolina rejected the 14th Amendment. Kentucky rejected the 14th Amendment. Virginia rejected the 14th Amendment. Louisiana rejected the 14th Amendment. Delaware rejected the 14th Amendment. Maryland rejected the 14th Amendment.
Wow.
Mississippi rejected the 14th Amendment. Ohio rejected the 14th Amendment. New Jersey rejected the 14th Amendment.
That's 15.
Yeah.
15 rejected.
15.
Do the math, people.
38 minus 15 is 21. No, I'm sorry. 38 minus, what was it? Minus 38 minus, so there were 15. 37 states, 28 were needed, 21 ratified, so that means 16 did not, 16 did not ratify it, okay? So, let's move on down here now. Legally constituted and fully recognized and functioning member states. Now watch this. Legally constituted and legally constituted and fully recognized and functioning member states. Now what that means is, these states that have been excluded, what you need to realize is constitutionally, they are in fact constituted legal states.
Guaranteed.
They're fully recognized and they're functioning member states. They're functioning in their own state. And it's these people that they're keeping out, okay? Because they know they're going to vote.
Right. And those states are guaranteed 2 senators from each state.
Yeah, and the right number of House of Representatives, okay? So, notice, so let's take that subject right here and read this one, Steve.
There was no question that all of the southern states which rejected the 14th Amendment had legally constituted governments and were fully recognized by the federal government and were functioning as members of the states of the Union at the time of their rejection.
Okay, so here's the issue. These states were rejected, okay? But we're indicating here that they were actually legally constituted governments. In other words, they were following the Constitution. To become a state, you have to submit a request. You have to follow the guidelines. You have to have a constitution. You have to guarantee that you will have a Republican form of government. Hold it now. not Republican Party,
Right.
a Republican form of government, which means representative, okay? So these were fully recognized. They recognized them in Washington, D.C. And they were functioning as member states, doing everything correctly back home. Now, what happened here?
President Andrew Johnson, in his veto message on March 2, 1867, House Journal, 39th Congress, second session, page 563, pointed it out.
Okay, so here's what President Andrew Johnson at that point in time is going to say about all this. He said, listen to this. He said he vetoed it. He sent a veto, okay? He's in Congress. Veto. He said it is not denied that the states in question have each of them an actual government with all the power, executive, judicial, and legislative, which properly belong to a free state. So he's saying these 15
They're
states,
legal.
these states you've excluded, they are legal. He said they are organized like the other states of the Union, and like them, they make, administer, and execute the laws which concern their domestic affairs. If further proof were needed that these states were operating under legally constituted governments as members of the states of the Union, now watch this. See, that's why I gave you the date back here. When the 13th Amendment was done in December of 1865, we're just a year later. When they're keeping these people out, okay? So if further proof were needed that these states were operating under legally constituted governments as members of the Union, the ratification of the 13th Amendment by December 8, 1865 undoubtedly supplies this official proof. They were legal a year earlier, okay? And then it says,
Wow, that's a good point.
Yeah, if the southern states were not members of the member states of the Union, the 13th Amendment would not have been submitted to their legislatures for ratification.
That's proof that they allowed them to be there, so they're valid for the...
Yeah, see, this is why I said, Steve, when you read this stuff, you have to allow it to process. This is reasonable logic.
Okay. Maybe thinking ahead, like you say sometimes, it's something like there's some political retaliation for the Civil War against the southern states and the northern states. We may see that someday.
Okay. Now here it is. The 13th Amendment of the United States Constitution, the 13th Amendment, was proposed by joint resolution of Congress. It was valid, okay, and was approved February 1st, 1865 by President Abraham Lincoln, as required by Article 1, Section 7 of the Constitution. In other words, they passed it, sent it to the President, and he signed it, okay? The President's signature is, in fact, affixed to the resolution. The 13th Amendment was ratified by 27 states of the then 36, okay, states of the Union, including southern states of Virginia, Louisiana, Arkansas, South Carolina, Alabama, North Carolina, and Georgia. Those are some of the states that were excluded a year later, okay? This is shown by the proclamation, this is shown by the proclamation of the Secretary of State in December 1865. So what happens when you propose it, 2/3 of both houses pass it, you send it to the President, he signs it, you send it out to all the states, and when it comes back, the Secretary of State is tallying this up. And when you have enough votes to ratify, the Secretary of State makes an announcement, okay? So so he says, without the votes of the 7 southern state legislatures, the 13th Amendment would have failed. You had to have it. There can be no doubt but that the ratification by these 7 southern states of the 13th Amendment again established the fact that their legislatures and state governments were duly and lawfully constituted and functioning as such under state constitutions. Point number 3. Furthermore, on April the 2nd, 1866, President Andrew Johnson issued a proclamation that, quote, the insurrection which heretofore existed in the states of Georgia, South Carolina, Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee, Alabama, Louisiana, Arkansas, Mississippi, and Florida. Those are the southern states that were involved in the Civil War, okay? They're rejecting all this. Said, and is henceforth to be so regarded. Now, the insurrection heretofore is at an end, okay? Is at an end, that's right. all this is at an end. He says, look, it's over.
Yeah.
It's over. Okay? Then on August the 20th, 1866, President Andrew Johnson issued another proclamation, pointing out the fact that the House of Representatives and the Senate had adopted identical resolutions. Okay, so you got this proposal, identical, on July 22nd and on July 25th. One was on the 22nd, the other on the 25th, in 1861.
That's
right.
Yeah.
That the Civil War forced by disunionists, that's the Southern states, of the Southern states, was not waged for the purpose of conquest or overthrow the rights of established institutions of the states. In other words, the Civil War is fought, but we're not trying to get them out of it. We're not trying to get them out of the Union. That's right. So he says, was not conquest or overthrow the rights of established institutions of the state, but to defend and maintain the supremacy of the Constitution and to preserve the Union with all equality and rights of the several states unimpaired, and that as soon as these objects are accomplished, the war ought to cease. Okay? Now, he said the President's proclamation on June the 13th, that's President Johnson, the President's proclamation on June the 13th, 1865, declared the insurrection in the state of Tennessee had been suppressed. It's over, okay? The President's proclamation on April 2nd, 1866, declared the insurrection in other southern states, except Texas, no longer existed. It's over. On August the 20th, 1866, the President proclaimed the insurrection in the state of Texas had been completely ended, and this proclamation continued. Here's what he says. The insurrection which heretofore existed in the state of Texas is at an end, and it is to be henceforth so regarded in that state, and in other states before named, in which the said insurrection was proclaimed to be at an end by the aforesaid proclamation of the 2nd day of April 1866. He said, and I do further proclaim that the said insurrection is at an end, and that peace, order, tranquility, and civil authority now exist in and throughout the whole United States of America. That is in what? It is in 1860. Right here now. It is in 1866 now. Okay? Then he says in point 4, when the state of Louisiana rejected the 14th Amendment on February 6, 1867, making the 10th state to have rejected the same, or more than 1/4 of the total of the 36 states as of that date, and leaving less than 3/4 of the states to possibly ratify the same, the amendment failed of ratification in fact and in law. It could not have been revived except by new joint resolution. See, in other words, okay, it failed. The only way to revive that is to go back and start all over again, see?
Including those states that should
That's
be in
exactly
there.
right.
Give it a fair shot.
That's right.
Yeah.
It could not have been revived except by a new joint resolution of the Senate or House of Representatives in accordance with constitutional requirement. Now, here we're going to get into something here, the 3 Reconstruction Acts. This is amazing. This is actually how all this took place, Steve. So let me see here. I think what we need to do is we need to stop here, okay? We need to stop right here because these three Reconstruction Acts are going to tell you how they came down here and subverted these states and were able to refuse to seat them, okay?
When will this study be?
This is going to be Sunday morning.
Yeah, I'll be in town after all.
Okay.
I can't miss this.
Okay, it'll be this coming Sunday, and we'll pick up right here and move on, okay? So if you will, go ahead and pray for us, my friend. And we will move on, okay?
Father, we want to thank you for our nation, what it's been through, Father. Been through so many attacks from so many areas. We see now the unraveling, the undisputed facts written in the journals of our history that can't be deniable. And things today are being accused and attacking our leaders that are undeniable, undisputable. Yet they change the words, they change the context, they try to distort the real truth, Father. So we ask your healing upon our nation. We thank you for these forefathers. And the original framers of our Constitution knew what could possibly happen, to try to put all those safeguards in place which are slowly trying to be crumbled by these evil people. So we ask your blessings on this. Ask and thank you for Dr. Jim to digging this out and making it clear to me. I don't know how I ever would have learned it if he hadn't brought it to make it so clear. And Father, we need to share this with other people, and we need to get it to our government people. And though some will be reluctant to believe it, but some may turn an ear, Father, for the destiny of our nation is at stake. So we ask your blessings on these things. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Steve, in terms of fairness, I may dig this out, but I found it's a part of Judge Perez's statements here, and these are the things that he said and that he wrote about all this, which makes it possible for us. People can go out on the internet. This thing is posted out there, I mean, all over the place. You just have to know what to be searching for, okay?
Look how far back Judge Perez was.
Yeah, well, actually, he's written in, I want to find the date when he wrote.
In the 40s, wasn't it?
Well, it was in the 1900s. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'll just have to find out.
So that's been out there all this time.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
But see, it's hidden. It's buried down.
And the sad part about it's not taught in our public schools.
That's exactly right. So what we'll do is we'll come back on Sunday morning, and let me just say this to all of you who are out there online with me, Facebook, YouTube. If you don't have this document, you want the whole thing, I'll send the whole thing to you. I need an email address. Text me on Facebook. IM me on Facebook. Get my email address and send a request. I will send the entire document to you. So I'll have this up on YouTube here shortly. But God bless all of you, and thank you. Share this with other people. Actually, follow me on YouTube. Dr. Jim Bertel. That's my channel, Dr. Jim Bertel on YouTube. I got 150 videos out there of what we're doing now. So God bless all of you. And we're going to say good night, and we will be back this coming Sunday morning. Bye-bye now. Let me shut him down. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and close down Facebook, and I want to thank all of you who are with me on WebEx. Okay? God bless you, and good day.